Now, back to Dirty Sexy Funny with Jenny McCarthy.
Welcome back to Dirty Sexy Funny. I'm Jenny McCarthy. In the studio with my BFFs, Colleen and Melissa. And we've got a special guest who is brave enough to join us in the Chicago studio. Welcome.
Oh, it's so nice to be here with you ladies.
He wrote a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome. Trust me, you guys are gonna want to get it. So don't forget it. Human Magnet Syndrome. Ross Rosenberg, welcome to the show. So this book is, I feel like, it is a breakthrough book. You invented something that I haven't heard of before. Can you explain what that is?
Well, the breakthrough really was the breakthrough in my life. You know, after being married twice and divorcing twice of two women that were harmful to me, as a therapist, I had to figure out a reason what was wrong, or I was going to have to deal with my own shame and guilt. And so I worked really hard in my own therapy to figure out what was it about me that kept falling in love with the wrong type of women. Because therapists, most therapists are pretty good at diagnosing others, but not all of us are good at diagnosing ourselves.
So that's interesting. So therapists do go to other therapists for themselves.
Oh, absolutely. It's a big part of what we do.
I love that. Okay, good. I had no idea. So then we'll go ahead, Colleen.
I was just going to say, I mean, you would have to,
right?
Because, I mean, just think about how, like, you can't see something in yourself, even if you're a professional.
Right.
You still probably can't, you know,
it
that
takes
would
a
be
lot
difficult.
of work.
Yes.
It probably takes an extra 30 years to sit there and try to self-diagnose yourself. Plus, there's so many, like you said, I was reading in your book, the defense mechanisms that we shut down and we forget about our core trauma,
right, that
you need someone to help you go backwards and figure that out. So let's start from the beginning, which is codependency. Describe what codependency is for everybody, the correct term.
Well, codependency, by the way, I just came up with a brand new name for it because codependency has such a negative and shaming sound to it. So the new term that I will be using off and on is self-love deficit disorder. But for our listeners,
which is brilliant.
Self-love deficit disorder or codependency really is a personal problem that it manifests in relationships. A person who is codependent always is on the giving end, is always on the giving end in a relationship. They're always giving love, respect, and care to everyone that they know, hoping that it will be reciprocated, hoping that they'll get it back. But they don't, and they try to control the situation in the person, and they still don't get it. They get angry, and they still try to get someone to be fair and giving and loving back to them. And what makes them codependent is they stay in the relationship.
Because no matter what, it still makes them feel whole, or
Not
it feels like
lonely.
they have some type of identity.
It actually, that's the lie that they tell themselves. The codependent tells themselves the lie that I feel whole, this is my identity, this is who I am.
Right.
But really, inside there's a fear that if they don't participate as a giver, the altruist, the sacrificer, that they won't be loved and they'll be alone. And they have to face the stark reality of a lonely, shame-based life. Because underneath all of the codependency is someone who never really learned that they were worth being loved just by who they are, so that they feel whole by giving. So paradoxically, they're not whole.
That felt exactly like me until I did a bunch of therapy and had to go backwards and like heal the young me who was the like over the achiever, try to like, you know, give money, just try to win people's love instead of having them love me for me. And it wasn't until I was in an abusive relationship, you know, pathetic relationships where I would support unemployed men, and then another abusive relationship, and then unemployed men. And then I kind of took a year off and really did some work. But it's fucking hard because a lot of people don't want to go backwards. And I got frustrated sometimes with therapy because I was like, I feel like they're going to bring me back and put stuff in my head.
Right.
And is that a fear for a lot of people?
Well, a lot of folks who work with me don't really understand what exactly we're going to do. They just hope that the pain will go away. And essentially what I do is, very similar to your own path, is I understand that codependency is really a symptom. It's a symptom of something deeper. And the deeper is not loving yourself, not respecting yourself. So I trace back the symptom of codependency all the way back to its origins. And almost always, codependency can be traced back to being a child, having one parent who was a narcissist. a pathological narcissist, and they learned that the only way that they would be loved if they could be the pleasing child, the trophy child, the good child, or the child to just stay out of trouble. And they learned that by doing doing the right thing, they can feel safe and loved. So they're essentially human doings instead of human beings. So the treatment for codependency is to trace back the core into the child that they once were, and that's where the therapy is, where you're actually dealing with the traumatized child that they carry.
And that narcissistic parent isn't necessarily one that people would think of when they see narcissist. It could be a happy, loving household, but a father or mother that's kind of emotionally distant, and that would even cause that.
Well, Dart, and I'm glad you said that, because narcissism is understood as a personality profile. There's many different types of narcissists, but the basic definition is someone who does not, who conditionally loves, who is all about themselves, who only give when it makes them feel good. So if you are raised by a narcissist, that can be a workaholic father who comes home, buys you gifts, and takes you on vacations, or it can be the alcoholic father, or it can be the garden variety narcissistic father or the borderline father. So the child's point of view is that they're not being loved by who they are. They feel that if they don't act a certain way, they'll lose the love or they'll get hurt. So that type of narcissistic parent causes harm during a very, very important developmental stage when children need to be loved unconditionally.
God, isn't that fascinating? Look at Michelle. Melissa's in a ball in the corner. So then is it always true that a codependent person, an unhealthy one, I'll say, an unhealthy, I guess, is that even a way to say it?
Oh, sure.
Okay, an unhealthy codependent person, are they always with a narcissist, or could a codependent be with a codependent?
According to the human magnet syndrome, which I'm a big fan of.
I am too.
No, but seriously, I believe that, and I've received feedback all over the world that 99% of all codependents who are making conscious decisions about their relationships will fall in love with a narcissist. It's the dance. It's if we understand that in a dancing relationship you have a leader and a follower, and the only way that this dancing relationship can work is if each person understands their role. And so when the codependent wants to dance, she or he only knows how to take care of others, has no idea on how to take care of themselves. Well, vice versa, the narcissist only knows how to take care of himself. So then when they meet, there's this unconscious connection of almost like they know each other. So we understand chemistry as this intuitive, unconscious explosion of attraction. But what chemistry really is the unconscious matching of these two, their self-orientations. The codependent feels so comfortable in the role of caretaking. So when they meet this beautiful narcissistic woman, they don't say, "Oh my gosh, I just met a narcissist. They're going to hurt me." Yay! Cha-ching!
It's unconscious.
It's unconscious. What they see is a beautiful woman who's bold and confident and sensual, maybe sexual, who knows what she wants and is charismatic. They're falling for the outer characteristics. And when the narcissist meets the codependent, they don't go, "Wow, I finally found a person I can manipulate and dominate. Can't wait to..." I just met a person that understands me. I can tell her about my 5 failed marriages and the several times I've been arrested, and she can cry and hold my hand and be so unjudgmental. So what happens is this magnetic pull of opposite personalities. It's like they've known each other their whole life, but really, it's a reiteration of their childhood relationship with that narcissistic father.
Damn. And that's...
Or mother, for that matter.
Correct. Melissa?
I've got a question.
All right.
Couldn't a person be the flip side in a different relationship?
I was just going to ask that.
People ask me all that. I get that question all the time, and I always say no.
I don't understand the question.
I mean, like, I've been with what I believe is a narcissist, like two of my most damning and troubled relationships in my whole life. The main 2 relationships I've been in, certainly I would say that the man was a narcissist. But I can think of 2 that I've also been in where it would appear that I am.
Okay. Well,
right.
Well, here's my explanation. For if a person, not you, but if a person, it really is codependent in that, or is towards on the codependent side, they're unconsciously going to be attracted to the narcissist. It's a human magnet syndrome. So if my experience is, the strong attraction, the chemistry, the intensity is going to be felt with the narcissist.
The ones I don't cheat on.
People, if you're a codependent, you can easily date someone who's codependent, but you will probably do that for safety.
Yeah.
They'll be good friends, but they will not have that magical energy that.
I go from narcissist to codependent to narcissist to codependent
So
because I'm like healing after the narcissist with someone who's
That
kind to
was
me.
was my cycle, exact
Right.
same thing.
Right.
And the codependents were your resting point.
Yes.
Yes.
And then I end up horribly hurting that
Yes.
person and going on and leaving them for a narcissist.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and that's just the part of you that doesn't want to be hurt and understands either consciously or unconsciously the human magnet syndrome. But the ones that really get you going, the ones that feel like
The ones you marry.
true love, the soulmates. But the healthier you get, that soulmate feeling is real. I mean, the human magnet syndrome is not just about dysfunctional love.
Yeah.
As healthier we get, the stronger the opposite personalities still match, but
Okay.
they're opposite healthy personalities.
Okay.
How much does divorce affect kids?
Well, anything that is disruptive and traumatic always affects children.
In your therapy, when people come in and have codependency issues, is the divorce a big factor in their childhood?
What's the bigger factor is the environment, the family environment that preceded the divorce. If they're screaming and yelling, cheating, and then there's a divorce, and then there's an angry, bitter, vindictive divorce, that is extremely damaging to children. But if there is such thing as a pleasant divorce, I've heard a few of those choices.
Maybe more nowadays.
Well, probably there are two codependents who are married and they just kind of grew apart. but it's the way the divorce happens and what happens afterwards that is damaging. So divorces by themselves are not nearly as good as not being raised in a family that's been divorced, but it's really how the parents handle it and what they do afterwards that causes the most damage.
We're talking to Ross Rosenberg. He wrote a book called The Human Magnet Syndrome, Why We Love People Who Hurt Us, which is so insanely powerful and crazy. It's available on Amazon.com. Do you have another question, Melissa?
I do. What about how damaging is straight up abandonment?
Well, see, abandonment is the core of the codependent's experience. And abandonment is one of these subjective terms. It could be physical abandonment, like dad or mom is absent. It can be emotional abandonment, that they're just never there.
What
when
about
they're
both?
There. Or both. The abandonment translates to a deeper problem, and that is feeling not lovable. So children, we as human beings, even primates, believe it or not, we are we've evolved that so that we need love in order to develop to be healthy, loving adults and be healthy, loving parents. And if that is absent in our lives, something kind of puts us on the wrong path.
So what about the fact though that I had one loving their parent? Very much so. Like, do I really need the other one that badly?
I wish it was that simple. And then I wrote about this in my book and in my YouTube channel, and some of my videos on my YouTube channel, is that the codependent parent often is the loving parent, but it's not what it seems, because the codependent parent often spends a great deal of their energy trying to take care of the narcissistic spouse while balancing the needs of the children. And the child often will say, well, mom was there for us, but she also was trying to deal with all the bullshit that was happening in the family. Later in therapy, they realize, after years of idealizing the codependent parent that loved them and protected them, they come to realize that this parent actually should have protected them more. And part of the psychotherapy process is to get them to understand that it's okay to be mad at your mother or your father, but you also have to hold them responsible, because how can you stop your own codependency if you don't take responsibility? And the one thing that is different from my book than any other book out there is I say codependents are responsible for the relationship. They're not responsible for being hurt. So when we idolize the codependent parent, we are blocking ourselves from taking responsibility for our codependency. To take care of our children, to love our children, we have to make sure they're in a loving environment that's stable.
That was a huge breakthrough for me when I was in therapy because my dad was a drinker, and my mom, I grew up she never showed any emotion. When there was like something big that happened in the family, she would just smile and sweep it under the carpet, and everything's just kept it all the way. And it wasn't until I found accountability on her side that I kind of became free, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And I teach this to a lot of therapists and my clients. You can't see in other people what you don't see in yourself. So if you are kind of like lying to yourself and say mom was this perfect person, mom took care of me, then how do you like understand what you are or what you're doing to your own kids as a codependent? And so by holding your parent responsible, which I don't think necessarily has to be a bad thing for the parent, that's a personal choice. You're opening up your life to see the world as it is, because to say mom was a victim, or dad for that matter, the codependent parent was a victim, then you're saying that your codependency is you're a victim and you don't take responsibility. Because how can we stop the pattern if we only blame others? And there's a lot of books out there's a lot of YouTube video, a lot of radio that is always saying narcissists are horrible, 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 horrible. And by the way, I don't think they're so great. But we're participating in the dance.
Right. It does take two.
Yes, it does.
For sure. I can think back on even my marriage. I mean, mostly that's what I'm talking about. And say I gave him zero boundaries. There was no...
I wonder why.
Because I loved him. And I didn't want him to go or be mad.
And he might have left, and you intuitively knew, unconsciously and probably consciously, that any time in the beginning of the relationship that you might have put out a boundary, there was a negative response.
Yep.
And codependents...
I can name that literally that day when I learned, this is I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to bring that up. This is how we're doing this.
Codependents are mind readers. And what I mean by that is that they lived in the toxic environment that they grew up in. They needed to be hypervigilant. They needed to read people's emotions. They needed to figure out situations because that's how they survived. Their siblings might not have fared so well, because in families in which there's a narcissistic parent, there's two paths that you can go. You're going to go towards the codependent side or the narcissistic side.
Wow.
If you can figure out, be the one child who is a beautiful, pretty child, the intelligent child, the athletic child, or the child that keeps out of trouble, the narcissist loves children that make them feel good. But what about the child that can't figure out a way to make the parent love them? That's the bad seed. That's the bad child. So when we look at these families in which there's a codependent, there's also, if there's siblings, they're either going to be codependent or narcissist. And the narcissist adult sibling will have the experience of they were the bad one. They were the lost one.
Yes, Colleen.
Is there such a person who's not a codependent or a narcissist?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. and
I'm like sitting here putting every single person I know into one of those.
Yes.
and Jenny had mentioned in the beginning of the interview is my continuum of self theory.
Yes.
And very succinctly, it explains that all of us fall on one end of a continuum. We're more on the orientation for taking care of others, or we're more on the orientation of taking care of ourselves. And taking care of ourselves or others is not bad. The more you go away from the center, the more polarized it gets.
That's right.
And the furthest you go on this continuum, taking care of others is codependent. And the furthest you go on the other side of the continuum, taking care of self is narcissistic. And in the center is this hypothetical balance, which this
it's not an extreme one or the other. It's like a spectrum.
It's
that
like
you can be on.
and you want to find yourself in the very middle, like because codependents have a tendency, like I remember back in my past, like my mom, like I'm always doing everything for everybody, and became a little martyr and couldn't say no. You know what I mean? So then it wasn't until later she found herself coming back into that middle character, which she was, because she was the sweetest woman in the world and would do anything for anybody, the saint. And then finally was able to go, no, fuck you, I'm doing this for me.
Well, I think we've all heard that if you have to take care of yourself first, or else you cannot take care of others.
Absolutely.
Like you have to be like, what's the expression about moms? Like if moms
Put
are
on
happy,
the mask. The oxygen mask thing is the big thing.
Right.
yeah, from the airplane.
Well, and that's why I am going to rename codependency. Give me 2 years, And I want to have everyone.
I love that.
It's self-love deficit disorder, because at the core of every codependent is someone that struggles with self-love.
It's such a good idea. Let me take a quick commercial break and come back, because I have a plethora of more questions with Ross Rosenberg. Be right back.
I might never be a knight in shining armor. I might never be the one you take home to mother. And I might never be the one who brings you flowers.
I just flew in from the Windy City. The Windy City is mighty pretty, but they ain't got what we got. I'm telling you, boys, I ain't a swapping half a deadwood for the whole of Illinois.
Now, back to Dirty Sexy Funny with Jenny McCarthy.
Welcome back to Dirty Sexy Funny. I'm Jenny McCarthy. God, I'm in love with this topic. I'm one of those, as my BFFs will tell you, I love to psychoanalyze. I self-reflect. I also will try to help everyone else and diagnose them like a true codependent and narcissist mixed together. But I mean, I feel like the journey that I've been on, I'm so, looking back now, so grateful that I did do the work, because I can't imagine the relationship that I'd still be in. Like, I truly, after doing the breakthroughs that you were talking about, I was able to find the healthiest love of my life. Melissa, you have a question.
What do you two mean when you say do the work? Trace it back?
Well,
write a letter? Like, I don't know how to fix it.
Okay, well, first, I similarly, because I did the work, I similarly found a soulmate. And it's not that we found each other. I mean, the Hewitt Magnuson says people who are similar in their mental health, who are opposite, find each other. And my soulmate, Carell Rosenberg, it took me 3 marriages, and none of it happened by coincidence. I busted my ass in therapy. To your question, which was,
what is the work?
What is the work?
Yeah. How do I get there?
And here is my biggest issue with the psychotherapy field, and I'm a big fan of psychotherapy, and I've been on both sides of the couch, as I say, is that there is superficial psychotherapy that is really good for people who just need support, but when people who have problems such as codependency, which are a symptom of deeper trauma, and I call it attachment trauma. Mm-hmm. So if we boil down what happened to the codependent, is they didn't have a healthy attachment to a parent, aka the narcissist. You have to be able to trace back the problem to its origins, or the original condition, as I call it. And that work is deep psychodynamic family of origin work, where you're actually getting into the person's conscious and unconscious memories of what it was like when they were a child. And it's very, very, it's complicated, but not so. But when you can get the person to connect to those memories, connect to the story that created them, that's where the person needs the most help. So when I'm working with a codependent, ultimately I'm working with the child that they used to be, because we carry that wounded part of us, that wounded child within us. And that wounded child is the one that wants to be loved, but keeps picking narcissists. And that's a child that needs to learn that they're worthy just by who they are, and they can take care of themselves. So the work, as I understand it, requires psychotherapy that can dig deeper into the original wounds or the trauma and resolve it at that level, and then move the person forward so that they can be a whole integrated adult and love themselves.
And it's not just going back and remembering a moment, it's going back and really feeling, and like I said, finding the accountability and getting angry. Like, I remember I had to go through the emotions.
Yes.
And let it out.
Yeah, and the emotions are actually stored or kept in a different part of our brain. And if we think of trauma, we think of PTSD and, veterans that come back, our mind or our brain cannot handle certain levels of trauma. And if it's so bad, like loneliness and neglect or abuse, it puts it back into another part of our brain, in our limbic system. So when we are actually doing that type of therapy, or when Jenny and I were in that type of therapy, when we were remembering and feeling and getting angry, we were accessing those memories that were locked away. And it's almost like we had to clean out that memory room, that trauma room, in order to be whole and connected to ourselves and love ourselves. And because you can't be in a relationship with and expect someone healthy to love you if you aren't healthy to
Love yourself completely. Melissa, look at, oh my God.
I even get afraid that Colleen is going to leave me. And I'm not kidding.
You're kidding. Why? Why would you think that? You're afraid a friend would leave you.
I mean, I'm like, you're not going. I'm not going anywhere.
She's
Like,
had to
where
tell me
am I
this
gonna,
more than once.
Probably like 3 or 4 like serious tears.
Well, I mean, I've talked to you
Crying
too about like
conversations.
loneliness is your biggest fear.
I just think that I'm not afraid of being lonely like with Colleen. I just think that like I'm not even worthy of Colleen being my friend and that she's going to figure it out and she's going to leave.
Well, it's abandonment, and that's the core fear of the codependent is abandonment, and it's because that was like etched into their psychological soul, that they experienced that if I didn't or do this or mommy didn't do this, daddy or mommy would get so mad. So they learned to do everything right in order people wouldn't leave. And that psychological feeling is in us all the time until we solve that. And it does get better when we start to work through what had happened to us and we start to let go of those memories and experiences.
It's true, Melissa. Like if you knew how awesome, you have no idea how awesome of a person you are at all. And I could see you like, you're funny and using a lot of the humor for people to like you or doing favors, whatever. But you have to know that you're awesome for you. And that's where, obviously I'm hoping you get to. And that's self-love.
And Melissa, I've seen it all the time. And it starts where sometimes the moment could be now where you actually, and that's what I try to do. And whether it's, and we didn't mention it, but I have a YouTube channel that has 70 videos, but almost 2.5 million people have watched these videos. And the reason that a therapist in Chicago like me is getting all these views is because people for the first time are hearing the message and it's resonating and it's striking an emotional chord like with you. And that's the very beginning. And that's where it starts. And it always starts with a lot of pain because in a realization that there's something beneath the codependency.
And what if you don't treat it?
You dance that dance. My mom, God bless her soul, and she is my guardian angel, and I know she's over me right now. When she was dying for cancer, and I get goosebumps just talking about this, we'd go into the hospital and she would say, don't bring me flowers, bring me food because I want to give it to the nurses, because if I give, she was always thinking about giving things away from others. She was buying carpet for the house to make sure that my dad was taken care of. She was making excuses for my father who didn't want to visit her. She was asking always about us. Don't forget, and so I had to tell my mom, because we had a close relationship. I said, Mom, it's all right. It's all right. We're fine.
Oh my God, that's so sad and sweet and sad.
It's sad, and the sad part, and my mom was sweet and great, but the story, I say the story is that we can take this to our grave, or we can change now. And my favorite saying of all is by George Eliot, it's never too late to be the person you should have been. And I don't care if you're 20 or you're 75, that we don't have to spend the rest of our life like that.
Can you dive into, because I remember, even in the 80s, no one talked about self-love. If it was considered masturbation. So today, everyone talks about it, and I talk about it on the show constantly. And I remember when I was doing the work and stuff, I'm like, what is self-love? Am I supposed to hug myself? Am I supposed to look in the mirror and say, I love you? Can you describe for people how to get there, how to self-love?
Self-love comes from a belief, first. And if you don't have the belief that you are worthy and good enough, then anything you do, whether it's anything you do, is never going to be enough. So self-love really requires a journey to figure out why you don't love yourself and resolve that. Because you can't put on top of something that, you can't fix something by putting something on top of it. So once we get to the point of why solve the conundrum of why we don't love each other, don't love ourselves, then the self-love actually is an organic process that kind of flows from the person. And I don't really have to say so much. But in the beginning, I have to teach them, be around people. I have to remind them it's not needy to ask for favors. It's not rude to interrupt people when they're talking all the time. It's okay to ask your husband or your wife to take the kids out to their dance recital, considering he never does anything. And so it's teaching boundaries.
Being able to say no.
No, or more, being able to say, this is what I want.
Right.
Because no is a good start. And there's 4 stages to codependency recovery. And I have a video on that also on my YouTube channel. And the first stage is to set boundaries in a hostile environment. Because when you start setting boundaries, and which is the beginning of self-love, and part of a portion of the process, everyone's going to be mad. I call it.
It's true.
I call this my Surgeon General warning. But I have to tell people out there I'm neither a surgeon or a general. But you get a pack of cigarettes that says if you smoke, you're going to have bad breath and you might have cancer when you get older and make some little babies. But I say if you're going to proceed in codependency recovery, the world in which the social sphere in which you live are going to be mad at you. The narcissists are going to call you selfish. They're going to confront you, and they're going to try to break you down. And you have to stay strong, because the hardest phase of codependency recovery is setting the boundaries with people that have expected you to not have any.
Yes, Colleen.
I was just going to kind of add, I guess it's a question though, when those people are your family, I think that gets pretty complicated. Like you can't just be like, later, family. Or that could be really confusing for someone codependent, because you love your family and you want to love them, and it's not like a friend that you can just who's a narcissist or whatever, who you can just get out of it.
And it's interesting because a lot of my work leads me to my next idea, and so I created everything that I've been talking about so far, and then I came to this understanding that I have to teach people how to deal with narcissists who they still want in their life.
I guess that's a better way of wording the question.
That's actually really good.
And I have a technique called the observe, don't absorb technique, and I'll let the listeners check that out on YouTube. But I teach them to detach from the narcissist as a way to survive. It's not fighting, because if you fight the narcissist, it's like George Bernard Shaw said, when you wrestle with pigs, you get dirty.
That's the last 3 years of my marriage.
I know
didn't
so
engage.
many people like that.
You stop engaging because it's too ugly.
But is that healthy? I don't know if it is.
Of course not.
Well, let me. So George Bernard Shaw said, if you wrestle with pigs, you get dirty, and besides, the pig likes it. So the point is, every time you set a boundary and try to take on a narcissist, you're going to lose.
Big time.
Because how could you win in a fight when you're not deceptive and narcissistic enough to win?
Yep.
So what I do is I teach people to detach and not get sucked into the malignant pathology of the narcissist world. So that doesn't mean always that you have to walk away. It means that you have to emotionally disconnect.
Yes.
And that's how you protect yourself.
Yeah.
Because once they get you emotionally activated, you're in the palm
Then you're
of their
not in
hand.
love
feeding
anymore,
them.
though, and your marriage is over.
But what if that's your husband or wife?
Yeah.
Then that seems to me to be completely unhealthy also.
Well, then, so if you're saying if your husband or wife, and let's say husband, has a narcissistic personality disorder, then I say, then it's an unhealthy marriage, and you probably are very unhappy.
Right.
So, and there's no easy way to solve this.
Okay.
So you can decide to stay in the marriage for all sorts of reasons and be as healthy as you can. And of course, that will really piss off the narcissist.
Oh my God.
The healthier you get, the more the narcissist
Freaked
gets
out.
angry.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Because not everyone can leave someone in divorce. I mean, not everyone has the money or the insurance.
Correct. That's a big piece of things, too. I can't tell you how many times I've been like, if I had $1 million, I would be so gone.
Right.
Years and years and years
Right.
ago.
Go ahead, Colin.
Well, I was going to say, just going along with it, the narcissist wants to keep you down.
Because
No.
if the narcissist keeps you down, he makes you feel the narcissist
You need 'em
survives.
more.
Well, the narcissist survives on the codependent having low self-esteem
Yes.
and being afraid. Loneliness is the core withdrawal symptom of codependency. So if you should, any codependent I've ever known, including myself, if you should not be in therapy and break up with your narcissist, or he should break up with you and be alone, it is a pathological, agonizing condition that, like alcoholism or other drug addictions, that will almost a physical sensation that will drive you back. It'll drive you to lie to yourself and make things up to go back to the narcissist. So the loneliness really is a key issue to deal with in the recovery process, because it's not like setting the boundaries as I recommend, or using my observe don't absorb technique, or this, that, or the other. If we haven't done the work that Jenny and I were talking about and deal with that part of us that is so afraid of being alone because we don't feel good just by ourselves, which is that wounded child we all carry, we go to that lonely place, and like any addict, the withdrawals are agonizing.
Terrible.
And they
Terrible. I better take a quick commercial break, so don't forget that question, and we'll be right back with Ross Rosenberg. The Human Magnet Syndrome is the name of the book. We'll be right back.
Chicago, Chicago, that toddling town. Chicago, Chicago, I will show you around.
This is Dirty Sexy Funny with Jenny McCarthy.
Welcome back to Dirty Sexy Funny. I'm Jenny McCarthy. I thought David doing a dance, I'm like, wow, he really likes Madonna. And that was the, look at he's dancing. Like a virgin, more like it. We've got about 15 minutes left of Ross, and I want to just suck as much knowledge out of him.
He's so smart.
So smart. Ross Rosenberg. You can buy the book at humanmagnetsyndrome.com. Get the book there. Also, he has a YouTube channel, and I've been addicted to that. I've been sending it to everybody I know. Just put on Ross Rosenberg, and you'll see those.
Jenny likes to send them to me at nighttime so I can cry myself to sleep.
I send them to everybody. I'm like, hey. And I'm like, I was on this path, and it reminds me of yours. Take a look. Okay, so I like this thing, 11 tips to healing your invisible wounds. We talked a little bit about going back into the core trauma, but Melissa brought something up that I thought was interesting, which is, how do I go and do this work if I have no money? And Ross said, well, it's very difficult, but not impossible.
It's difficult, and it's not impossible. You have to figure out a way to access the what I call the original condition, the attachment trauma, and come to terms with it.
I know what it is,
but that is actually a really, really big step.
Okay,
but it needs to be worked with in the hands of a therapist or a practitioner that understands.
Don't you have insurance?
I can't just use Colleen.
Is Colleen a good therapist?
Kind of.
Okay, there you go.
I'm very
I
supportive.
do have insurance, but it doesn't. Of course I do, but it's not. The person that I was able to go to under my insurance, I hated.
Oh my God, I remember that. It was a nightmare.
So then maybe the person that he'll recommend might work under your insurance.
Or it might not.
It won't.
Well, and
that's fine. I'll figure something out. But I hated her.
I get calls. I get hundreds of emails, letters, and phone messages saying, "Will you work with me?" And unfortunately, I can't, because I can only see so many people. But what I tell them is I tell them, find a therapist that has these three characteristics, and that is they have an addictions background, because codependency manifests like an addiction.
Totally.
They understand psychodynamics, and that who we are because of what happened to us as children. They have a family systems background that understands that we are all connected in our family, and we all affect our emotions. And then ask them if they read my book. Now, I don't say this to plug my book. Really, I don't. But my book offers an explanation that is concise, that creates kind of a paradigm for someone to help the codependent. And I say, if you can find someone with those three areas, and if they're humble enough to read a book that you recommend, I said, buy the book. There's no reason why any other therapist can't do what I do. if they understand the problem as.
And inside of his book, too, like, for instance, he has 11 tips to healing your invisible wounds. And literally, it's like, write a letter to your wounded self, write a list of your dreams and goals you had let go of because of your trauma, write a list of all the dreams and goals you want to commit to. And so he takes
that is work. That is part of the work.
It's totally part of the work.
Right. I've got another question. So let's say I have been known to even chase, bad friendships, let alone men. And sometimes I will still do it to this day. What is my trigger? Why do I have a relapse sometimes?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, first of all, codependency is self-love deficit disorder, or codependency is a disorder that affects all relationships. It manifests most
sexual relationships,
most crazily.
Yeah.
No, that's not a word.
Yeah,
I make up new ones
Intensely.
all the time, Ross.
Most dysfunctionally in our romantic relationships. Typically, people who are on codependent or on the codependent side also have relationships with people on the narcissistic side. So, so my tips always are not what to do with narcissists, because you can't control them. In fact, step 1 of the 12 steps of Codependency Anonymous is to understand you're powerless over controlling others. It doesn't say you're powerless over codependency. Is to understand that you can never control others, especially when those others are narcissists. So my advice always is to understand why you need that person so much in your life that can't be controlled, who won't take care of you as much as you take care of them. And the therapy process, whether and however you get there, will, once you get there and understand through this growth, this organic process of self-love, you all of a sudden lose the energy of being around them.
It's true.
It's the human magnet syndrome works for healthy people. For example, when I met Carell, I'd been in therapy for a while, and I had this incredible love at first sight attraction. But if she was, if I met her 15 years before, there would have been no attraction because I changed. And we still had that human magnet syndrome connection. But so no one told me what to do. I just became healthier, and my attraction template had changed with that.
Because it really is a magnet. That's what people don't really understand. It's not just a pun. You're really attracting it on an ethereal level.
Yeah, and I said this as a joke, I think in the last radio show, is Match.com, I think, has it wrong. Because they try to match you by what's similar. Now, it is true. We all start there. I like someone who's this, who's that, who's that. But what really, really gets you is the chemistry.
Yes.
And the chemistry is all about the human magnet syndrome. It's the unconscious, intuitive, instinctive magnetic pull where that person feels right. And if you're healthy and someone else is healthy, it feels right. So later on in my recovery, and I went on a date with a narcissist, I went, oh, shit, I got to get out of here.
Yeah, red flag.
Whereas maybe 10 years before that, I would say,
marry me.
Well, I probably have other thoughts before that.
You know what my therapist said to me? She goes, Jenny, you have an amazing ability to bleach red flags white. And I was like, oh my God. And it wasn't until I finally went, she goes, you're going to go on 60 dates in the next 2 months, and just one date, and you're going to notice red flags. That's all I want you to do is just go, that's a red flag. Because before I'd go, white, it's fine. He didn't say that. He didn't say that he cheats all the time.
He did not mean that. Right. Not on me. He won't.
What about like a codependent person that, how do I form the question? Knows that they're unhealthy and wants to get healthy, and in the meantime doesn't want to form a relationship, but just wants to go out and have sex at least.
Okay, well, I say that's an adult who has who is acting like an adult. We can make our own choices on what we want to do, and their own personal morality will guide them. And if they want to get laid because they want to fulfill a need, go for it. Just don't hurt yourself or hurt someone else.
I'm so glad you said that, because I thought he was going to say act like a child.
No, but
be careful, because the codependent will wind up falling in love with the one night stand.
But now the other side of that is I don't think it's necessarily healthy to do that on a regular basis, because we are built to be in relationships, and the friends with benefits, or just hooking up, or a booty call, everyone says they can handle it, but there's always one person that can't, and that's the one, the codependent, that really wants to handle it. The codependent always says it's just sex, but I promise you one person is going to be holding back and want more, but they don't want to say anything. So someone always gets hurt in that. And so I say, if you have to do it, try to be safe and don't lie to yourself.
Good advice.
How does that sound?
I can do that. Starting now.
David, I know you had your own trauma back in your early 30s, but it wasn't necessarily your family trauma, because I don't know your family trauma, but a relationship trauma that allowed you not to get intimate the last 10 years. So is anything ringing a bell here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, where my problem, or where I don't let myself get into relationships at all, to even really explore who's the codependent or who's the narcissist. But even with some 2-month dating, I can definitely see into that, whether or not things would go long term before I sabotage somehow.
Right. And David, what I've seen and actually participated in is that codependents in recovery who have been in therapy will know who is healthy, and they will know that they're dating someone that's healthy, but because the chemistry is not there, they either consciously or unconsciously sabotage it, and that's the crazy thing. Is and how many people do we know that finally date the healthy person and then they screw it up?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Because there's a part of them that they're just craving the chemistry, and the chemistry is the human magnet syndrome, the pathological side of that.
And when I would date sweet guys, the reason why I now I know why I wasn't attracted to them, but I also didn't believe them when they were like, I love you, like I love everything, and I was like, you're fucking lying.
Well,
I didn't love myself.
I would think that then they were losers if they loved me.
Exactly.
Who's that guy who said I don't want to be a part of any club that would have me?
Oh.
That's me.
I think it was Marco.
It was Groucho Marx.
Marco.
That's who it was. Yeah. So
Marco Rubio.
That's how I feel.
Isn't it bizarre though? Because I remember thinking like, this guy's a fucking loser, and he's lying to me just to kind of stay with me.
I'd be like, he must be a loser because he likes me. I got to get out of this.
I remember 3 months before I met my wife, I met this woman who was perfect, beautiful, had the right job. She liked my politics, my music. Everything about us was perfect. And when we met, there was no chemistry. And I kept thinking, well, I was just nervous. I didn't know why I was nervous. So we went on a second date thinking, well, we were just nervous. And still no chemistry. So I thought I'd walk her to a car and I'll give her a kiss, because you know how
could ignite.
the kisses can sometimes get things started. Well, and she turned her cheek, the old friendship move. And we realized at that time that there was no chemistry. She was more like a friend, like a sister. She said that. She said, Ross, you're more like a brother or a friend. Mm-hmm. I later put that together when I was writing my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, is we were too similar. We were on the same side of the continuum, and although we liked each other, there was no chemistry.
Got it.
So the best thing we could say is it felt more like a friend or a sibling, which is kind of weird.
I've been in those relationships too.
And so for me, that explains that when we meet someone that we want to like and love because they're so perfect, but the chemistry's not there.
Yep. That makes so much sense to me. I was engaged in my 20s to a guy, and we were 6 months before the wedding, and I went, you feel like my brother. I liked him because we felt so similar. The problem is, now I know, we were on the same side of the
continuum.
Thank you. I feel like it's Space Odyssey 2000. We're running out of time. So actually we don't have, because I want to do a lot of plugs. Listen, Ross Rosenberg, he's, as you can hear, one of the best. Go to youtube.com if you want to see some of his videos. I was addicted to him this past week, just like drinking them up like soul food. You can say hi on Twitter at Ross Rosenberg 1. You can hear my Chicago accent right there. Buy his book, you guys, humanmagnetsyndrome.com. Get the book there. If you don't have the money for therapy, I highly suggest diving into his work. If you do have the money for therapy, like you said, I'm going to end it on the quote where you said about change. Can you give it to us again?
It's never too late to be the person you should have been.
There you go. So let that resonate a little bit, and I hope you do, and I hope this affected so many people and you do something about it.
Twitter's blowing up.
Is it? All right, you guys. Ross, thank you
you so
so
much.
Thank you.
much.
We appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Oh, it's a delight. I'm so glad to have been here.
Ross Rosenberg, the Human Magnet Syndrome. Thanks so much, you guys. See you next week. This was a good